Today I want to talk about the Amish and electricity. Now there is a lot of false information online, and I'm here to explain my experience growing up in the Old Order Amish. First off, we are not taught anything about electricity, and we are just taught in church that we're not allowed to have electricity in our house. But there is lots of other ways to produce electricity, and the Old Order Amish do a lot of that. For example, in our community, we would use battery-operated lights for the lighting throughout the house. And we're allowed to have LED bulbs, but a couple generations back, they didn't have that for their lighting in the house. And they used to use propane lights. And still to this day, there is certain Amish people that still use those lights. Some of the stricter churches, like the Schwarzentroober Amish, would as well. But in the Old Order Amish, there might be certain people that like those lights, and they would have one of those that they use sometimes, plus they would have their battery lights as well. And same thing with the buggies. In our community, we would use batteries, like the big ones that you put in a car. Those same batteries is what we would use in the buggies. And we used to use those in the house. There's some people that do, but then there's some people that use the power tool batteries for their lights. Like DeWalt batteries, they're smaller, they're more convenient. So that is more common in some households in where I grew up in Middlefield, Ohio. Almost all Amish homes have a landline phone in our area, and they're not allowed to have the phone inside the house. It has to be a certain length away from the house, and typically it's in a little phone shack. So if you see a tiny little building beside Amish people's homes, that is what's in there, is their landline phone. Now, in generations ago, they only had like one neighboring landline phone that they would use, but nowadays, most of them in our community all have their own landline phones. The only time that they would be allowed to have a cell phone is when they own a business, and even then you're not supposed to have one that you can use internet with. So it's a small little flip phone. And also, a lot of the people in Rumspringa, before they become a member of the church, in our community, most of them have a cell phone, whether that's a smartphone with internet or a flip phone without. And again, it's not that they are specifically allowed to have phones. Some of them are allowed to because their parents allow it, but others, their parents don't allow it. That was my parents. They did not allow it, but we still had one, me and my brothers, because almost everybody before they become a member of the church, they do have one at one point, and we just hide it from our parents. Now, if you're wondering how we charged up our phones, well, we use batteries again. Sometimes there is an inverter on top of the battery we would use, or just some clamps that attach to the battery terminals, and then it's converted to a USB. And the way that the Amish would charge their batteries is either generator or solar panels is also becoming more and more popular in the Amish communities. Also, sometimes when an Amish person has a job where at their job they have electricity, they can take their batteries with them or their phones and charge it up at work, but a lot of them do use generators. Now, the reason why the Amish are not supposed to use electricity in the traditional way is because it's against their religion. So if someone, a member of the church, would just go and build a house with electricity, then they might get shunned if they don't remove it or if they don't move out of the house within 1 year. Because in our community, we were allowed to rent from a house for 1 year with electricity, but we were not allowed to own the house. And then you have to get rid of it or you might get shunned. The answer I got when I was Amish about electricity was, this is the way we've always done it, but it's actually not the way they've always done it. It's just a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, and basically it comes down to if the bishop of the church allows you to have it, and there's a voting they do to allow new stuff in the church. That only happens 2 times a year. So if they allow you to have something that you were not allowed to have before, like battery lights, then they do it that way. That's not the way they've always done it, but they still say that, and it's just, if you don't follow the rules of the Amish church, then you can get shunned. Generations ago, they also had kerosene lamps and oil lamps, and some of them nowadays have maybe one of those because they like it, but it's not their main source of lighting. For ovens and refrigerators, we would use propane. Now, some churches do not allow propane, and they would not have freezers. You would have to get ice to put into your ice box to keep your food cold. but they can't have freezers. They would have to go somewhere else, like a locker, a freezer locker, where they would keep some of their frozen stuff. But more and more churches in our community are allowing propane and natural gas, which is more convenient, and they just have a huge tank in their yard with propane in it. And as far as hot water, now again, we had propane or natural gas hot water heaters, but not all of the churches allowed that. So my mom, when she was growing up, they had a wood-fired hot water heater. And when I was growing up, for only a few years, we had like an oil hot water heater that we used. That was right before they allowed the propane hot water heaters in our church. But now most of them just have propane or natural gas. But in other churches, there's a lot of them who still have the wood-fired hot water heaters. As far as running water, it is a misconception that Amish don't have running water. All the Amish that I knew of when I was Amish have running water. Now, some of these stricter communities like the Swartzentruber Amish might only have cold running water, and if they need to heat it up, they would just put it in a kettle and put it on the stove. That's what my mom used to do when she was growing up. The thing that I've seen most commonly in our community is an air tank. So the air pressure is hooked up to a gas motor, and the gas motor powers the air compressor, and then it's used to pump the water. And we would have to start the motor about once a day, but when we lived in our old place, we actually had to start our gas-powered motor like 20 times a day. So typically that's not the way they would go. I'm not sure why we had to do that, except for the motor was inside of the house with the exhaust going outside, where in our new house we had a separate little shack where the motor was in there. And then just to be clear, where I grew up in our community, the showers is the same as anybody else's house that's not Amish. It's just hooked up differently. So we would just turn the knob on and it would be a shower head just like anyone else's. As far as air conditioning, of course, we're not allowed to have air conditioning. The only time I have seen it in our community is there's certain people that might have a certain medical issue that they need an air conditioner, and then they would install one only for that purpose. Most Amish would have battery-powered fans, and that's what we used in the summertime. So you just bring a battery in and hook it up to your fan. There is someone in the Amish that does this for a living, is converting some of appliances and fans and stuff to batteries specifically for the Amish stores. And that's the same thing with washing machines and sewing machines. Nowadays, a lot of them are getting battery-powered sewing machines, as well as battery-powered or batteries hooked up to solar powered washing machines. But we used to, and there's still a lot of people in our community that just have a gas powered motor to run their wringer washer. They still have the wringer washer, there's just different ways to hook it up. You can use a generator or you can use a motor, which is what is most common. Some of them also have a spinner where you can spin out the clothes separately so that it's more dry, and then they would hang it outside to dry completely. In my mom's generation, they also all had like the pedal sewing machines, but nowadays more and more of them are getting the battery ones. There's still a lot that have the pedal ones as well. Of course, we are not allowed to have TV in the Amish, so we're not allowed to own one. If we would definitely get shunned. But sometimes when we went on vacation, then we were allowed to watch TV while we're in the hotel room. A lot of the kitchen appliances like blenders, they would have that converted to a small power tool battery as well. I've seen those. They're not too powerful, but they can also use a generator. But that's kind of a big pain to run the wire all the way through the kitchen to run your blender. So a lot of them are now coming out with the battery ones. And of course, the Amish don't have vacuums because they don't have carpeting in their house. So the only vacuums I've seen is like the push ones. There's no electricity required. You just push it across your big rugs because they do have a lot of rugs in their houses. And as far as an iron, we would use a butane iron. There's little cans of butane in pretty much all of the Amish stores, and that's what they use it for, is for their irons. They used to use one that you just put onto the stove to heat it up, and every time you lay it down, instead of on a table, you would lay it down on the oven or the stove to heat it up again. There is still some older people in our community that still use the ones that you heat up on a stove, but it's not because they have to, it's just because they like it better that way, and that's what they choose to do. But the butane ones are the most common. So again, the reason why the Amish do these things a little differently is because of the electricity, the way that it is off the grid. They're not supposed to do that because it's against their religion and their Ordnung, so they can get shunned if they don't obey the rules. Thanks for watching.